now that you have been, at least according to this court, exonerated or justified, what happens to you, and what happens to what they've been doing, and how much of the brakes do they hit on this? Like, what changes? Does anything change in the government's sweeping surveillance?
It's a great question. I mean, you would think when you get a court, not even a first level court, but an appeals court that looks at these issues, they're talking about serious stuff. They're talking about counterterrorism investigations. By the way, in the same thing, in the same decision, they said the government has been arguing, for 20 years now, these programs were saving lives. They were stopping terrorist attacks. They said, first they said mass surveillance had stopped 54 terrorist attacks in the United States. Then they dropped it to 7, and then they dropped it to 1. And the one terrorist attack or terrorist conspiracy, whatever, that they said it did stop was this case that was just decided. And the court found, and this is important, after looking at the government's classified evidence, so this is not just the court deciding on their own, this is the government going, look, here's all the evidence that we have, the top secret stuff, the stuff that nobody can see, please don't, say our program is ineffective or whatever. The court looked at it and they went, holy crap, this invasion of hundreds of millions of Americans' privacy happening over the span of decades did not make a difference in this case. They said even if, or even in the absence of this program, if it hadn't existed, if government had never done it, they still would have busted this ring because they were already closing in on them. The FBI already had all the evidence they needed to get a warrant, to get the records through traditional means. And the fact that the government had been saying, Congress had been saying for years and years and years that this program was necessary, the court says that was misleading, which is legalese for saying the government's effing liars on this. So that raises the question of, okay, like as you said, well, what now? How does this change everything? Well, it does mean the government has to stop doing this particular kind of program directly, but that program had already shut down. And the government has a really great team of lawyers for every agency, right? The DOJ has got lawyers, the White House has lawyers, the FBI has lawyers, the NSA has lawyers, the CIA has lawyers. And the only thing these guys are paid to do all day is to look at basically these legal opinions from the court that says all the ways the government broke the law and go, is there any way we can just rejigger this program slightly so that we can dodge around that court ruling to go, all right, the abuses are still happening, but they're happening in a less abusive way, and then it's business as usual. So this is always the process with the courts ruling against the government. This is not an exceptional thing in the case of, it's NSA and CIA. What happens is when the government breaks the law, as the court has ruled them to do last week, there is no punishment, right? There is no criminal liability for all the bastards at the head of the FBI, the head of the NSA, who were violating Americans' rights for decades. Those guys don't go to prison. They don't lose their jobs. They don't even see the inside, smell the inside of a courtroom where they're the ones wearing handcuffs. And because of that, it creates a culture of unaccountability, of impunity, right? Which means with each generation of government officials, they study this. They study the cases against them. They study where they won. They study where they lost. And what they do is they try to create exactly what just happened, which is a system where they can break the law for 10 years, 2001 to 2013, basically, and no one even knows that it's happening. Classification protects that, right? Then eventually it gets exposed. There's a leak. Of course, somebody blows the whistle on it, right? It becomes a scandal. The government, they'll disown this program. They'll change the law there. But somebody, like the ACLU, will sue the government. And so the courts will finally be forced to look at these things. But the wheels of justice turn slow, right? The government will try to put the brakes on it. The plaintiffs, the civil society organizations that are suing, will have to gather evidence. It's really difficult to do because the government's not providing anything. It's all classified. And then basically it takes another 5 years, another 10 years for the court to get to their verdict. And then we have it. But then nobody goes to jail, right? Nobody actually faces serious consequences who is responsible for the wrongdoing. And so the cycle continues. But having said that, like, it might feel disempowering. People might go, oh, we can't win. But this is in the context of a system where we lack accountability, where the government does have a culture of impunity. This is what winning looks like, because things do get better. The problem is they get better by decades. They get better by half centuries and centuries.